Hi everyone, my name is Ken Coleman. I'm a digital artist from Ireland and I lecture in game art and design here for Clonmel Digital Campus. I'm going to show you my process of using 3D scans of action figure armor and how I've created an image of Skeletor, one of my favorite bad guys, in Zbrush using my 3D scans and some model parts from Daz, and how I brought it all together and I've lit it, and I'll show you how I light it in Keyshot and have it ready to go as renders to composite as an image in Photoshop. Okay, so how I start off is, here's my Zbrush interface. And the first thing that you'll experience is if you do use 3D scans, which you can get from places like, if you don't have a scanner, you can go to Scan the World. And you will find them here on My Mini Factory. And a person called Jonathan Beck, using an Artex scanner, has scanned a lot of stuff from different museums. So you can take these, download them, mess with them in ZBrush. You know, most people use them for printing. I like to use these for experiments in lighting and compositions, abstract design and illustration. So when you bring in an object into ZBrush that you 3D scanned, what often happens is it comes in upside down. So just to show you what an image, a model looks like that is comes in scanned. So I'll go Import. And press Import, and I'll grab one of my He-Man models from my file. So I have a library called my Einscan folder. My name, Einscan models. My Motu. Motu stands for Masters of the Universe. And I can grab any, I'm just going to grab any model there. So let's just go right, Skeletor. Dragon Blaster, Dragon Skeletor, Dragon Blaster, Skeletor A. This is actually the one that was used in this one, in the illustration for ImagineFX. So it would be appropriate to open that one. So let's have a look here. That's the wrong model. That's actually I just accidentally opened the Daz body. So it's in, where's my Dropbox? July. Skelegod. Let me see. Where are you? Dragon Blaster. Skeletor. Yeah, that should be it now. If I just check this one. So this is the dragon that's on the back of Skeletor. As you can see, right? Now, this is one thing that bugs me about ZBrush. When you open ZBrush, you get this little menu and you press hide. If you're working on a small screen, sometimes the buttons are over each other. Just press comma on the keyboard and it goes away. Now, I've pressed T, so do not switch. T means all of these buttons are highlighted, which means it is a 3D model. So when I drag on my screen anywhere, there's my model. And I know that if I just go zoom out a second and press floor, my model has actually come in upside down. It always does. The model is always upside down when it comes off my Einscan 3D. So I need to use the gizmo tool to rotate it there. I turn off gizmo and re-transpose, like re-drag the transpose tool so it's now aligned to the center of the model. Okay, as best I can. So as you can see, he's way off the back of the center there. I'm going to turn off the gizmo, realign, turn it back on, and now I can rotate him properly. Okay, so that's what a model looks like when it comes in, and you sometimes have to prepare it like that. Okay, now in this case, if I go to my recent documents, and here's Skeletor. This is the last version of Skeletor I did and created. There he is. And I've got everything already placed on the model. Okay, and I'm going to just show you how I do it. Okay. So that's Skeletor using a body from Daz that I created and posed, brought in all of the model onto it. Okay, and I'm going to show you how we do it. So I'm going to go to, let's start again. Okay, so to start off, we had this model that I created in Daz 3D and I posed and brought in to ZBrush. I use character morphs quite a lot in poses for a quick start in DAZ, and then I strip it back in Zbrush. So I just got this lovely pose, and I have a model called Dark Guard, which I love for the shape and the texture and everything that it is. That it works very well for creating barbarian characters and the style of stuff I want to do. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go Subtool, Append, and I'll bring in a sphere. Okay, and then we're going to press Import. There's many ways you can do this, but you need to basically make another subtool to bring in all the parts. Now, for this tutorial, I actually have them all laid out just to show you how they come together. Because I showed you originally that when you bring a scan in at first, and sorry, I was on the wrong subtool. You have to make sure that subtool is selected and bring it in. And we get subtool 1, which is Skeletor's hood. Okay, so it comes in, and now it is placed simply because I had already prepped the model. Okay, so it comes in place. So another way I can do this is I can duplicate that subtool, press import instead of append, and just import again and grab the next subtool I want. And by grabbing the next subtool, what happens is it replaces the old one. So now there's Skeletor's face. Okay, so I duplicate Skeletor's face and bring in another subtool. Subtool 3. And there's the armor. Okay, duplicate and press import. But I'll show you how, when the armor originally came in, it wasn't placed there like that. Okay, when I brought the armor in originally, I find Skeletor Gauntlet, Skeletor Armor, Mondo, Sea Filmation, Chest Armor, Dragon Blaster, Skeletor. You bring in any model, and it's going to come in into this file, and sometimes it's way off to the side over there. It's also upside down. So we've got to go in and go rotate. Now what I do is I turn off the gizmo and realign the transpose to by dragging down over the model. I'll drag it over here, and then I'll rotate it a couple of times. I'll rotate the canvas to see. Got to get him to place in. I'll rotate it now. So there's a bit of a knack to getting used to bringing in 3D scans into your composition. So this is a full leg that was scanned off of a 12-inch Skeletor body, and as you can see, I'm going to try and get it in place. And I only want the armor off it. Okay, I don't want the foot. So the next thing I need to do there is, if I press Control Shift and I change this brush, Control Shift brings up the trim bar for cutting tools. So I want trim lasso. Back to draw. And I'm going to cut off this piece of the shin that I don't need. Just give that a second. And the foot. And now we have the shin piece as I want. So what I need to do next is go where I want that shin piece here, and I want one here. So let's go move. Bring it across. Now I can see it's pretty much to the right because it's going over the other model, and I'll scale it down now and fit it, the armor, the way I want it on the model. Okay. So the main thing to remember here is your duplicate subtools, pressing import to bring the next part in. And if it's way over, you need to press frame to find it on the canvas, turn off the gizmo, realign by pulling down on the transpose tool, and then being able to place it and scale it on the object. So scale is this little one here, so you need scale and move it with these sidebars like that. And this is scale. I think we're going to small the model. Okay. And that's basically, that is repeated over and over and over again on the model to get it the way I want. So I end up with something like this. Okay. Now I picked this pose particularly out of a number of poses that I tried previously, and the reason is just because this pose of Skeletor works very well in one or two different angles for putting on a portrait or a landscape piece. In this case, I was doing the composition to fit the dimensions of a page from ImagineFX. So the next thing I want to do here is we got to get this into KeyShot if it's a finished piece, right? Since all our subtools are separate, that's great because I can actually drag different materials in KeyShot to assign them to different parts, okay? And that's what we're going to do. So to get it into KeyShot, I have KeyShot Bridge installed on my Zbrush, okay? That's something that is very important to remember, because if you were using Zbrush and KeyShot separately as programs, you never purchase the Zbrush Bridge, it won't automatically open in KeyShot. So I have to go to External Renderer, press KeyShot, and then press Best Preview Render, so BPR button. So when I press that, you can see KeyShot is opening down here. Skeletor is going to jump into the middle of the scene for me. So it's going to take a second to load, because it has to load all of the separate sections. So Skeletor has now come into ZBrush, sorry, to KeyShot here for me. And I'm using just these turntable and dolly cameras to get him in place. Okay, he's slightly off to the side there, tilted, so let's get that fixed. So I'm going to press on the model, position, move tool, and rotate Skeletor so he's more upright. You might see that's a bit better. I could do the final tilt on this as well in Photoshop when I'm finished. So there's Skeletor. My camera is set at 50. This perspective slider, so it's like the different lenses on cameras. So when I was experimenting with this version of Skeletor, what happened was some of the versions I said let's try a wide angle lens, and it didn't really work because it distorted the body too much. And this is something you really have to remember when you're doing illustration using 3D. If you use the wrong perspective, it may look good in 3D, but when you bring that to Photoshop and start putting in extra textures and stuff and trying to get to translate to a 2D image, sometimes it ends up being a 2D image where the figure just looks distorted, like it was never drawn properly, like the head is too big and the legs are too small. Okay, so in the case of this Skeletor, this figure, I'm going to work with 50 to 100 as my camera angle. Okay, now Skeletor in, ready to go. Let's add some lights to make this scene more dramatic before we start adding our materials. To do that, I go Edit, Add Geometry, and I'm going to add a sphere, because I like using spheres because they just remind me of big natural lights. So once I add a sphere, it comes in this blue material. And if I double click it, the material bar opens over on the right hand side. So what I'll do is I'll change that to area light, change the lumen to watt, and boom, all of a sudden the watt is so much stronger that it is lit Skeletor. Okay, but I want to change that lighting to a green because Skeletor, I like using green as a magical kind of a glowing light on my Skeletor, because I like using green to in my He-Man or Master Universe artwork to symbolize the evil magic of Skeletor, and blue for the power of Grayskull and the good magic that's coming from He-Man's sword. Also, I like to uplight the enemy, so the villain here, in this case Skeletor, has been uplit, so that's a nice position there. The next thing we'll do is we'll duplicate our lights. So we'll go back to scene, we can right click the sphere, duplicate the sphere, and then we have two. And we will put one up here, out of the way a little bit. Double click on the light symbol, and it will open up my material bar again. So I'm going to change that to a warm light, and maybe a blue light. That will work for Skeletor. We can't really use a purple because Skeletor will have purple armor and blue skin, so we want something that contrasts that. So a bright, let's go with a bright saturated orange, we're bringing down the power of the light a bit so it's a bit more subtle. And now we'll drag Skeletor into the center of the composition to where we actually want him to be for the render. Okay, and that's the point where I will save Skeletor. So I'll save this render now, save this position, and the reason is sometimes when you drag a material in, or especially using a Cintiq, if you're dragging a material in Keyshot, like if you drag it on like that, that's your material and that's how you drag it. But sometimes you drag the material and you go over here to press render, and as you drag across, the model rotates or moves, which means you've lost your positioning for rendering out all the materials in the same position. And that's really frustrating if you've done like 10 different materials and you're about to press render and you drag across the screen next to the model moves, which means you cannot add any more unless you have it saved in the position. So you need to press save as. But before I do, let's put on all the right colors. So I have a skin tone there for Skeletor. I use bone for his face. I have a matte purple picked for his armor and his gauntlets and his feet, his shins, should I say, and the legs. Okay, and I should get the gauntlet too. And I'm going to use red leather on the dragon. So that's the base coat. Alright, so I'm going to press save now and save the Skeletor. Okay, so Skeletor. Now, just to note, I've actually already rendered Skeletor the way I want him for the magazine article. So the lights are in a different positioning in this, but it is the same principle. Okay, so what I will do now is Skeletor saved. So now, and I have the lighting on, I press render. And I want to do it as a PSD file where it's a transparent background. I press clown, which creates the alpha that I use in Photoshop to be able to magic wand out all the sections. Now by putting on clown, when I press render, it renders out all of these different areas as solid shapes. You can magic wand them in Photoshop and actually select them separately, which is great. Okay, but what I do here now is I press add job, so that adds it to the queue. Okay. I will do a version of Skeletor with the light turned off, so I turn off the two spheres. So there's our base colors, and I press add job. So that's adding it to the queue here for my renders. My other two main materials I always use is if I drag on this blue white rim directly onto the Zbrush thing, Zbrush file over here. On that group, it basically covers all of the model. I press add job. And I also use ghostly human skin. And you can find them by pressing the cloud library here and searching and downloading, because they're not originally in Keyshot when you open it for the first time. Now, something to remember what I've done here is if I drag a material directly onto the model again, because I've put all of the model as one material, it'll automatically do that every time unless I unlock it. Now, do you see that there? See what's happened? I'm over here, and the Cintiq, the drawing tablet, is glitched, so now he's rotating all over the place, which means I can't get him back in the right position. I luckily have all the materials I've wanted done, so that's fine. But just to show you, I would have to go back and go File, Open, Recent, and reopen Skeletor where he is. I'll press cancel for now, but that's what you do to get him back in the original position. Okay, so that's a glitch that just seems to happen when I'm using a drawing tablet on Keyshot, so that's why I tend to drag my materials over and around to this toolbar rather than across the screen, so that doesn't happen to me. Okay, so if I want to unlink all the materials and reassign different materials to the body again, I click on my ZBrush group, I double click the state of unlock and press unlink materials, and now I can re-add different materials to different sections. Luckily, before that little glitch happened and started to rotate the model, I have all my materials saved the way I want. And then now that I'm happy, I press process Q. Okay, and what that's doing now is it's opening up the Keyshot render here on this side, and it's going to render all of these materials in different Photoshop files. There you go, of Skeletor. I'll leave that for a while, and once the render is done, I am now ready to bring them all into Photoshop and start compositing. Hi everyone, and welcome to the second part of the video, where I'm going to show you now that I have rendered Skeletor, how I build up all the different renders from Keyshot and to make a composition in Photoshop and a final composition then that we're finished. Okay, so this is my first layer that I've opened. What I do then, if I go into my renderings here, from my renders folder from Keyshot, and I start dragging in my other renders. So that's my blue white rim render. I've taken the liberty of adding a grey background because it helps me see if there's any other artifacts like shadows on the ground or something that have come in from Keyshot. So what we do is we set that to soft light, and instantly we start to get a lovely translucent glow on the skin. Okay, now I rendered Skeletor here with a couple of extra renders, so we have different textures for the face. So this is Skeletor, same Skeletor, but done with a green highlight on the face. Okay, so bring him to the back. You can see the difference. It's just the face. And what we also have is the alpha that I made when I clicked the button for clown. I got this great alpha. So when I drag that in and set it in place in my layer, but sometimes it automatically sets in place with the newer Photoshops. For some reason today it doesn't want to do that for me, but it means that I can actually cut that out, copy and paste, and now I have an outline of Skeletor. But what I also have from the versions where I rendered them out with different materials on the different sections, I have this version, which is great for being able to select. So let's say we just select the face on Skeletor like that, and then I can cut and paste it in. So I can blend the two other or mask it off or do different things to get Skeletor's face the way I want it by having this. And I have the armor separate, the dragon separate, so I can create masks. Okay, so we drag in the next layer. And this was one where I had done just the bone. So it's under it there, you can see. I use the bone translucency for the face. So what I want to do there is that I don't actually need the rest, just the bone face. So I'll get this, grab the bone, select it, copy and paste. So now I literally have just a version with just the bone face. See? And that's why these alphas that you export with the clown button turned on the PSD render from Keyshot, you get this fantastic tool to use to select the different areas. Okay, so I'm going to set that to soft light to give, or we can try pin light or lighten, loads of different things to get that translucency of bone on the face. Soft light works the best for me at the moment. Soft light is always just my go-to. This is the version where I had the lights turned on. Now, as I said, when I did the other part of the video, the lights were slightly different, so I actually have the green glow on a different side on this version of Skeletor. So there it is. Okay, and we keep dragging all our layers in. And I also went on and rendered a version with red, and the reason is, and we're going to mask this, so I create a layer mask, and I'm going to press off, and I'm going to set that one to color. I'm going to turn off the mask for a second, just so you can see. So I've set it to color. And the only reason is I want to keep all the lighting and texture, but I literally want to change the color. So I select the mask and I'm going to paint back in white. And let me just make sure, I'm going to make sure it's on my big lovely texture brush that I love to use for everything. Where is my Photoshop background? So what I'm going to do is grab the brush I want. I have this brush I think I got with ImagineFX a long time ago. But I use this to just, I want a red textured painted rim on the armor. That's it. It's literally the only bit I want red. Just that. And we could just put in a couple of flicks of red onto his bracelets too. If it's been chipped away and there's a red paint on it too, you know? Okay. Flip to black and just flip to back and cut it out where we don't want it. Okay, so we end up with something like that. Now it's coming together, but we need one or two more of my material layers brought in. So this is one of my favorites. This is the gauzy human skin. And when you add this to a piece like that, I turn all the lights off when I do this one so it doesn't oversaturate. When you add this, it really gives a sense of translucency to your piece of artwork. And we have this one, which was it's called Tune Line Shaded. Okay, and I set that to multiply. And what it does is it just gives me a little bit of line work. At a later stage, if I want to mask it or bring it in, I can actually bring in a little bit of line that will help to really make the model pop, or give it a bit of line work that and will help me to make some guides for shadowing or shading again later on. Now I have a couple of more materials here. I just want to check what I have. That is a plain black matte layer with just the main light on it. And if I set that to screen, now I have more light because all black goes transparent, and I can just bring the opacity up and down to turn the lights on and off where I want them and give it more light or less light. I think I have one more material render at that. I do. I'll set that to pin, soft light. I did one in this kind of molten red because what it does is it just really offsets some of the areas of the armor and the skin and creates this just this great glow, you know. And there's another copy of the face. Okay, so when I have all these elements done, I select all of them, I group them. So that's like my Skeletor master group. So master group of all the different material elements. Okay. Spelling error there, fix that. And grouping is very important if you were to work on this as a collaboration. So I've duplicated it by pressing Command J and then press Command E, and it merges the group. Okay, so now the group is completely merged. And my next trick that I love to do is I'm a big fan of Camera Raw. Always had been as a photographer. I've been using it since it came out. I think I started using Camera Raw in 2010 on my Canon 5D Mark II. So the next thing I want to do here is, now that Camera Raw for the last couple of years is actually in the filters in Photoshop, I love using it. So I duplicate my layer, I go to Camera Raw filter, and I have this kind of combination I always use, which is shadows up, highlights and whites down, clarity up slightly, saturation up, and it just makes my image pop like a proper painted illustration. Look at the difference. Now it's a really vivid 80s feel for me. Okay. Now I'm going to show you, that's how it would look, right? Now I have another version prepared here. This is one I've already worked on, where I've used these textures from my texture library, which are actually in the asset folder with this project with ImagineFX. And those textures I have overlaid and used masks from the clown tool. So I've used masks here from the clown tool, and I'll show you how I do one. So if I want to drag one in here from my texture palette. So if I go into Ken's textures by Ken, this is my own texture. These ones are made with polyfiller and a palette knife on board, and then painted with spray paints and ink, and then dry brushed a bit of white to bring up the highlights. And I have then one prepared where I've masked off the edges. Okay, so when I bring that in like this, drop it on my model, I press soft light, and I'm instantly getting lovely textures and painted looking textures. And this is why I use my own backgrounds, and I paint stuff for acrylics that can come into Photoshop later on, and I can constantly use them. So if I create a mask based off of this, and mask that texture there, okay, and then we turn off the chain link symbol, select the layer, and watch what happens. We can actually move the layer anywhere within our character. So I'm going to add a bit of that texture for the bone on the face. I'll duplicate it, and I'll add a bit of that texture down here, rotate it, and put it on the front. And we'll just keep going on, just fit that one texture everywhere it actually works on this model, and rescale it and stuff, so we can use that line, for instance, from the palette knife to match the line there. Okay, so let's bring in another texture. I have this lovely rust texture that was actually from eroded iron off the side of a gate, from the joint of a gate on a concrete block wall, and where all the residue off the iron and rusted over the years and created this lovely streak down the wall. We add that in, press soft light, and we can actually, by pressing Command and clicking on the mask, you can create another mask for that one. Again, turn off the chain, duplicate it. I make sure I'm on the layer and not the mask when I'm moving it, and I can move that around anywhere else to get a nice, what I like to think of as a kind of a painted palette knife feel on my artwork. Okay, so that's my really vivid version of Skeletor. I'm going to bring it over to the main composition in a second, but the first thing I'll do is I'm going to create a new layer and just get a small brush tool, and I just want to paint in the hollow of Skeletor's eyes, because I know they should be completely hollow, and the nose, so it looks more like that. Okay, so this is what I prepared earlier, and I used some of my own particle effects to do the eyes. So we're going to bring this in now to a composition over in I'm going to create a new layer, a new document, sorry, and bring it in. Now I know that ImagineFX cover is 22 by 30 centimeters approximately. Make my background a middle grey. For me it's around 128, RGB 128, anywhere there along that line to get a neutral grey. And the reason I use a grey background is when I drop in any other textures or backgrounds I want to use, they will the blend modes work better against the white. So let's turn off my extra textures here that we're not using. So what I'd actually do is, we brought it onto new canvas. Let's say we're happy with the whole thing. Let's group it, find a group that has the mask, and mask it all off. Okay, so there's that Skeletor, and what I'll do is convert to smart object by right clicking it. What that does is it adds the mask, but because it's a smart object, that Skeletor now can be moved around and scaled up and down, and we won't lose any resolution. Okay, so there's Skeletor. Now I'm very cheeky and decide what would it look like if it was actually selected for the cover. Okay, I'm going to show you. I did a version. So everyone, this is the final mock-up. I started with something like this, and just so you know, and there's a proper continuation. And this is what it looked like as I did it for ImagineFX, and I actually had put in from a sample template. I'd stripped out from a PDF and the logo and everything, just so I'd see what would it actually look like if it was on the cover. And the reason we do this is, if you're working as a book cover artist, you got to make sure you leave enough negative space within your image that a logo or any text that has to go on a book cover or a CD cover can be brought in. So in this case, looking at past covers of ImagineFX and looking at a lot of magazine covers like Vogue, where they cover some of the lettering because the logo itself is recognizable enough that it will be spotted on a shelf even if part of it's covered. So that's what I did here, and I said, what if this was a cover? Where would I need the negative space for any article text or any information to go onto it? So that's why Skeletor is quite plain in the middle. But I'm going to show you now how I would build up something like this, and I'm using a lot of my own textures and layers to do so. Okay, so here's Skeletor. Let's rotate him slightly so he's headed straight up. Okay, what I did next is I have, and I think these are in the assets folder that comes with this project. If I go into my assets, I have clouds and backdrops. Now I've actually hand painted these myself. So I have these what I call hand painted skies like this. I painted on a large canvas. Okay, and I have photoshopped these and blended them in different ways to create a range of different backdrops for myself that I can drop in when I'm creating any of this kind of 80s Frank Zappa style pop art, pop culture art, should I say. So here's one with some rust and some blue glows as a space, and when I set that to soft light, a slight glow now already behind Skeletor. And how I like to create my glows is like this. I'll set it to gradient tool, always set to the second option, which is foreground color only. I select the circle mode. I select make a small circle. And the reason I can select a small circle and blow it up is because if I do this, and then I drag it over, it's caught at the edge, and I don't want that. And I set that to soft light. So now I have a slight glow behind my character. Something I often do as well is if I press Command and float over the layer itself, you get that little selection box, and I click, I get the edge of the selection. and I'm going to create a new layer with a silhouette gradient back to the line gradient over the feet to make it kind of look like the shadows of these feet. Okay. Now my trick for lighting when I'm doing a piece of art is wherever the lights fall on the model that came out of KeyShot, I'll select that color and I'll try and select the brightest version of it. I'll go into the palette and see where it is and go over to its brightest family color. Okay, new layer, gradient tool, and in the same direction as the light, I'll create a new layer of that light. Great time to beach ball. There you go. You can set that to soft light, sometimes pin light, but it can be very strong and you have to mask it out. But soft light is a good start. Okay, and now we have a light source that's coming at the same angle as our evil character, and it's uplit because we're making an enemy character. Okay. Now we want to drop in some clouds, so I'll grab one of my cloud backdrops and make sure it's behind Skeletor. Cloud backdrop in. Now you can make these type of backdrops very easily by just painting clouds on canvas. I often watched a lot of Bob Ross when I was young. And then soft light, and there you go, we've got some clouds in. And I also have some clouds from some acrylics already pre-cut. I can add like this to highlight the edge of the character. Okay, add another one. Draw it down like this. Okay. And I've even done some planets in KeyShot. And some of them I've actually layered and textured already with some of my acrylic paints. So let's put in a moon. Now my rule when I'm doing anything, especially when it's something to do with the world of Eternia from He-Man, is, and this comes from the old episode 4 from Star Wars and the sunsets, is I always try and add a moon or 2 planets, so you know that it's not Earth. You immediately see these colors, you immediately see, and I'll desaturate that one actually. When you see it like this, you know that we're not on Earth anymore. All right, and that's very important when it comes to sci-fi, to kind of give the sense that this is not our world. So I've that done, and now I want to add some particle effects. Okay, so how I do particles is, if I go to my particle folder, I created one of these particles, a lot of these actually, by putting baby powder on black paper, black craft paper, and taking photos and bring up the contrast in Photoshop. So I have one here that's quite a big burst. So I'm going to put that behind Skeletor, like this. Set to screen, so black goes transparent. Okay. Now it's a smart layer, so I'm going to rasterize it because we don't need it to be smart layer. And we're going to use our color balance to make it a bright green. So if I go to shadows and make that green, mid-tones green, and highlights a little yellow green. And the reason I'm using green is it's always the magic color I use to represent the evil with Skeletor. That his magic is green and the good guys is blue. Okay, so it's like using red and blue in Star Wars for good and evil. And I've also, in using the particle brushes in Painter, I've already created stuff like this. And black background, so I have magic. I have Skeletor's magic here like this. I'll put that on his hand. Bring it above, press green. Okay, and that is how I built up this entire composition. It was just repeating this process over and over, and I'll show you how I put in some ground and some fog. So I put in another particle layer there, more talc powder, put it behind Skeletor, press screen, just to kind of really look like there's a little bit of a glow and particles flowing off him that are going through the light. Okay. And I want to go back, I have a landscape block in folder. So these are all Irish, a lot of it's Irish landscape that I've shot over the years. So I have these landscapes I shot up in Donegal, where actually this part of the landscape was actually the area where the Millennium Falcon shots and the X-Wing shots for Star Wars Episode 8 were shot in Ireland. There you go, there's some landscape. Now I'll maybe multiply that so it's behind Skeletor and it's off in the distance. Bring it down subtly. Okay, and now I'm going to be very cheeky. I'm going to duplicate it, set it to normal, flip it. Okay. in front of Skeletor's feet just slightly. And the reason is, if I cover the feet, I don't have to paint the underlying shadows. Because if you have the feet in front of it, you now have to go off and paint the shadows to where he's standing. If I do it this way, I don't. So I'll select that shape and put another shadow, a dark green maybe, coming down like that. Press multiply again. And just to make, and we want Skeletor to stand out from that background more, so we need another layer of fog around his legs, so his legs pop out as a silhouette from the backdrop. Okay. So I brought in a fog here. I press screen again. I put that fog just there behind Skeletor, and see how it all pops just from layering up all the particles on top of each other. All these things, very important. I'll grab some more glow into the other hand. I'm just going to manipulate the same file. And then we go, I have another particle here, more magic particles that we set to green. So same talc, screen, over Skeletor's hands, rasterize it. And then we go color balance again, green, 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 yellow. Duplicate that just by pressing shift on your Photoshop just to change the actual proportions. And that's the essence of how I created this character and so forth, okay, in Photoshop. But there's one more trick, one more technique I use to get this to get a real painted feel. And that's where I'm going to actually duplicate and flatten all this and bring it into Painter. Okay, so I'll duplicate my image. I'm going to flatten it. I'm going to duplicate it again. And what I actually want to do first, I forgot to do one thing. I'm going to bring over, I'm going to copy and paste out Skeletor and place him back in this one. And the reason I want to do that, copy, paste in place, is I want to copy the shape of Skeletor and put it back into his own image. So we have a version of 2 copies of Skeletor, 2 copies of the background, so we can use 2 different brushes in Painter. So we'll save as Skeletor for Painter. And now I'm going to move over to Painter and show you the last part of the technique. Okay, there's Skeletor on screen. I have pressed here and save as, and down here I said on computer I went save to cloud documents instead. Okay, so when I press save in cloud documents, it came into Photoshop, and from there, if I go back to Photoshop a second, I was in Photoshop and I went export, export, and I went through all options down to more, down to the very end, Adobe Fresco, and I clicked on that. Okay, and now I have Skeletor open in Fresco. I duplicated my layer by pressing the little options on the side and duplicate layer, and I have set the smudge tool, dry media, graphite, and now I can go in. Just a bit of fun there. Just bring the brush size down a bit. And of course then I can actually create and so you get quite a painted look. And soften out any 3D pixels that are left over in the artwork. See? What I want to do as well is go in there and get a new layer. And with that I go to my draw button, set my color to white. Oh, that's not white. Brush size 8. That's a horrible brush. I want taper. Actually go with a watercolor brush instead, or an oil brush. Let's have a look here. Oil. Painting detail, yeah. Ooh, very big. Undo those. Brush it way too big. Bring it right down, very small. Just get in some more detail there in the lighting. That's how I'd use. I used to use blend modes, smudge tools, and do line work over it then, a new layer. You could if you want then, of course. Bring that back into your full version of Photoshop. Okay everyone, here we are in Coral Painter 2021, the last part of the puzzle. So I brought in my Photoshop file here. Now Painter won't accept a PSB file if it's over 2 gigs, so you have to merge it down the layers, take out masks, etc. Turn off your grids, because sometimes Painter doesn't recognize some aspects of Photoshop. But here's my image of Skeletor. I have just 4 layers, so I'm going to work on the top 2 and keep the other 2 as backup. So what I do is I only use 3 or 4 brushes in Painter to get the desired effect. So I have Stencil Oily Blender, Fractured Blender, I use the Spring Particle Soft Blender, and then for line work I use Spring Concept Creature, and they're found in either the particle brushes or the blender brushes. Okay, and this is how we use them. So I'm now currently using the Stencil Oily Blender on a really large brush. I'm going to use that in the background behind Skeletor and watch what happens. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Sorry. Just that. I'm going to just kind of do a big, like using a palette knife over oil, and really break up that background. Get some extra texture in. Take off any edging that, like the planet is very sharp right now. You know, I could have gone back into Photoshop and blurred it out a bit. And I'm actually going to curve my brush around as well, so it looks like it accentuates the oval around the figure. Just take off any little kind of, well, you know, the bits, the little artifacts when you copy and paste in Magic Wand, especially with landscape. Right? Now remember, we have a second layer of this, so I do this where I just go completely crazy, doing big, huge brush strokes on the foreground and the background. But I could set that to lighten, and we still get some of the detail coming through. But what I'll actually do is I'll bring that back to Photoshop, mask it off, and only bring in the sections I want with a softer airbrush, with my texture airbrush set to a medium opacity. Now Skeletor himself, right here, I'm going to use the Fracture Render brush. Now how I get this custom palette, by the way, is if I'm on any of the brushes at any time, and I press Shift and I drag it. If there was no palette here and I press Shift, it would open a palette window here for you to start saving your brushes, and that's how we make the custom palette. And I have that always open with just the 3 or 4 brushes I want to use, and it's also set to kind of the size I want to use. So this is what's going to happen when I use. Let's go to his face and you can see. I'm going to use my fractured blender, and it's just for breaking up some of the shapes. And one of the reasons I love using these brushes is if I go close and I see any 3D artifacts that have been left over, like any kind of solid polygons or visibility that it came out of 3D, I can use this to kind of blend an oil paint over it to give me more of an oil painted mistake rather than And I repeat this process all over the characters. Okay, and I often use a fracture blender on the character and the big stencil oily brush on the back. And I want to use it here as well because the leg is actually protruding through the belt, but I want to make it look like it's just covering the belt. We don't want to overly break up our character, so our character becomes, or all our line work and all these things become unrecognizable. But just enough to give a nice feel of this native being painted by hand, like that. Okay. And the last thing I do then is I create a new layer. I go back in and I get my concept creature brush and I set that. Sometimes to the brightest colour I find on screen. Okay. As you can see right now it's set really, it's big enough, it's quite a big brush. But it's great for doing, if I want to add extra magic I can do another layer and go in here to Skeletor's hand and accentuate a bit more magic. Oh, look this brush is great for doing wisps and magic. I don't even have to worry about them being out there because they're all layered, so when I go back to Photoshop I can decide and change the colours again in Photoshop with the colour balancing hues. And so this one is going to be my highlight layer. And how I'll do it is I'll just catch any of the edges and make the brush really small, until 1 pixel. Catch any edges there where I think the green coming in off a glow would help accentuate some of the armour or details on my character. Like that. And again, paint over really heavy, and either in Paint or Procreate even, or Photoshop, you set that to soft light so it's a bit more subtle, and layer that up if I wanted. Okay, so that's how I use Stencil Oily Blender, Fractal Blender on different layers that I've prepared in Photoshop. Okay, and I break it up like that, and then I'll show you what the final build up looks like now in Photoshop. So what I'll do is I save that out, and when I press save, it saves it over my Photoshop version. Couple of different versions of Skeletor I've done over time. You can see where I broke it up there. And this was the final Skeletor that I created for this tutorial, where you see what it looks like with a logo on it, and then plenty of space. And I have all my paint layers here over the original composite. And as I said, I can go in, and and there's my paint layers, but they're a bit heavy, so let's mask it out. So we just have what we did in Photoshop, and we want to bring in some of the effects now from Painter. I use another texture brush, set to white, and then start to paint in the areas again with those layers here in Painter. Back in Photoshop. Now you can see the other sample, I really broke up the background. But if you have, like if you look at my planets closely, if you had areas there where, look at that, this is the type of noise that comes in from a 3D model where the geometry is broken there, and you want to fix that. Another way you can do it, I'm going to show you another trick. If you're not going to use Painter and you want to get an oil painted feel or a blur in Photoshop, without any plugins, you can go noise, press median, and it gives you a painted blur, more than using Gaussian blurs or anything like that. It looks way more like you use the soft oil brush to create your blurs. So sometimes I create that, and again I mask it out. And I'll go back and go, right, I don't want that piece to look so 3D. So let's blur it out a bit. Okay. Can help you create depth if you want to blur out your background, but I'm keeping a kind of a heavy texture feel over this piece. And that is how I use 3D scans with Zbrush, Keyshot, Photoshop and Painter to create an 80s oil painted highly textured feel. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you can follow it, and you'll find the resources available with ImagineFX. Thanks for watching, guys.